everybody, and welcome back. Hey, today's project is going to be aimed at mamas. So any adults can do it, and probably a lot of teens could do this project, but I have really had on my heart and mind a lot thinking about moms during this coronavirus quarantine time. You guys have a tough job. You're home all day with the kids, and they're probably getting a little antsy, and you're looking for things to keep them busy and entertain them. And sometimes I think you can get a little lost in the shuffle. So this is my gift to you guys. Let's do some flowers. We're going to be doing some drawing some flowers, learning the basic techniques. I'm going to walk you through it step by step, and hopefully it's something that you can use on your own and you can expand upon it. And then I'm going to show you some simple watercolor techniques for just adding a little bit of loose, fun color and giving it that kind of romantic feel to it. So for materials, you are going to need a Sharpie marker or some kind of permanent marker. You can also draw it out in pencil and go over it with a marker. That's not a problem, but you will eventually need a permanent marker. And you're going to need some paper and then just your kids' watercolors. Doesn't need to be anything fancy. I tried to think of using something that you probably already have in your home, and so my thought is the little watercolor trays that you get from Crayola or whatever. Those will work fantastic. And of course, something to apply that. If you have a paintbrush, that would be fantastic. If you don't, a Q-tip will work also for that, and then some kind of paper towel and water. So let's get started with this. If you like this activity and you enjoy doing it, I would love to see your creation. So please, by all means, send me a picture on Facebook, Artwork by Julia Coolish, and let me see your finished piece. That would be so wonderful. So I hope you enjoy this, you guys. So to get started here, just again, a real quick run through of our materials. You need some kind of paper. The thicker the better. If you have to use copier paper, that's not a problem. It's just not going to take the watercolor quite as well as a thicker piece of paper. So if you are using just regular copier paper, you may have to do a couple layers of watercolor and let it kind of dry in between, and it'll tend to kind of crinkle a little bit more, the paper. But you can tape your paper down with painter's tape. Some people like to do that. I tend to just go with the process and do it without. If it wrinkles a little, worst case scenario, I can run an iron over it when I'm done and straighten it out. Then I'm going to use some Sharpie markers. Again, I'm using the same Sharpies, the fine point and the ultra fine point that I have been. You need some kind of paint, a watercolor paint this time. So I just have a simple Crayola elementary kind of watercolor paint that works really well. I also will be using this, which is still a very fairly inexpensive kind of watercolor paint. This is like $6 for 24 colors, something like that. It's just maybe a little higher quality than the Crayola, but not much more. If you have Crayola and that's all you have, or one of those little elementary trays, you may just need to apply the watercolor a couple times in order to get it as bright as you would like. Not a big deal at all. Then you'll also need water and paper towel, of course, and then a paintbrush. If you don't have a paintbrush, don't worry about it. You can apply it with a Q-tip. That should work well, especially since we won't really be painting. We're really actually going to just be kind of dropping the paint onto our picture. So let's get started. And I will tell you guys, we're going to make basically about 4 different flowers, and you can expand upon these flowers and create all kinds of different things with these basic forms. Some people feel a little uncomfortable and a little intimidated by using, a permanent marker to draw on the paper. If you do, go ahead and use a pencil first, and then you can always trace over it. I will go fairly fast just so that I don't end up with an hour-long video. But of course, draw with me and feel free to stop and pause the video at any time to feel comfortable and make your flowers in your timing. Okay, so to get started, we're going to start with a fairly good size flower. And we're going to start up here in like the upper fourth panel of if we were to divide our paper into fourths, kind of the upper fourth panel. And so if you had 4 imaginary lines up there, we want the center of our flower to be just right in the corner of that 4th quadrant. So I'm going to draw just a little tiny circle, not even the size of a pea. And we will draw several more of those to make a nice big center, but that at least gives us an idea of the center of the flower. And so
Then I might take and draw just a couple little dotted lines around that, maybe a little bit bigger than a quarter and maybe a 50-cent piece. That's going to tell us how wide our center is going to be. And we don't have to go super wide, but, and then we're aiming to make a flower with 5 petals. So when I start to make the petals, it's going to be more narrow towards the center and then widen out at the top. But that doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be super narrow. So I'll show you what I mean here. I'm going to start, and I don't want to draw a straight line. I want kind of some curve in it. When I get towards the top, I want to get some nice little bumps up there. And then kind of bring it down. And notice it is a little more narrow than it is at the top, okay? And your little zigzags, or not zigzags, but little curves up in the top, they're going to look different than mine. That's not a problem. Mine are going to look different on each petal. That's fine too. You want some variety in there. Okay, we're going to go with their second one. Notice I'm going just right about to where my little dots are here to tell me where the middle is. So my next one, I'm going to let it overlap this a little bit. So notice I stopped it, brought it behind there, and came out the other side. A little bit less curving there. And again, not straight lines going down the side, but straighter than the top. A lot more curve there. Okay, I'm going to come over this way. This one I'm not going to worry about overlapping at all. And I came at it from a little bit different angle because my petal is going to come off the page there. But again, it gets narrow towards the center and wider at the top. And now I have basically 2 more petals to fit in here. Now, if it's so wide, you have to make it a 6-petal flower. Not a problem whatsoever. We'll decide when we get there. So I'm going to start off here. This flower is getting awfully big, which is fine. Okay, and one more. Okay, so there is the basic shape of my flower. I'm hoping that these are pretty close to the same length. This one maybe got a little shorter, that's okay. And then now I'm going to fill in my center. So I started off with just a little circle there. I'm going to go and add more mini circles, some full circles, some half circles, about the same size, little to make some little clusters. And as I get towards those little dots that I originally made, I'm going to try to go over them, cover them up. And I don't want my clusters I want it to form a circular shape, but I don't necessarily want to have like this perfect circle. So let me finish here and then I'll show you what I mean. So to avoid getting this nice like matchy perfect circle, I'm going to go around the edges and I'm going to choose to add some little bumps that are sticking out. They either can stick out all the way and just kind of hang out by themselves, like those, or they can be little half circles that kind of come out a little bit, or they can be both. So that way I have a circular shape, but it's not perfect. I need something right in here, it feels like. There we go, that helps a lot. Okay, so there's our basic shape of our flower. Now I'm going to set aside my regular Sharpie and get out my fine point, and I'm going to start to draw some little lines in the petals themselves for interest. And the trick about this is you want wave. You don't want them to be straight. So I'm going to do 2 that are fairly large. And notice how they're coming apart the further out you get, because it's following the pattern of the flower. And then I'm going to make one that's a little shorter here, and maybe squeeze a little tiny one in there. None of them have to go all the way to the top, and there needs to be lots of variety. And again, those aren't exactly the same pattern as I did here. I just tried to go with two that are a little bit bigger, hopefully slightly different sizes from each other, although those are pretty close. A really short one and a middle one. They don't have to be in the same order at all. Because we are using permanent marker, we will later be able to add watercolor to this to get some nice soft colors. So that is our goal. Okay, this one feels like I need another line in here. There's nothing that says you can't add more where there's some gaps. It doesn't have to be 4 every single time. Okay, I like the look of that. So now I'm going to switch back to my regular marker. And my next flower that I'm going to make, I'm going to try to have it go right in here, halfway tucked behind this petal. And I'm going to make a kind of a rose shape, okay? So for the rose, we want to start off, I'll walk through this pretty slowly. We want the center not to be too close to this. So I'm going to come out about here for my center. And I'm basically going to draw this shape right there. Okay, so start off with that one. And then I'm going to add to that. So I'm going to come right here and I'm going to pull a little pointed shape right there. And you can curve this in even a little bit. Then I'm going to come and I'm going to overlap this one. And again, get a little kind of, you don't want to make it triangular, but you do want to point on it somewhere. But notice how it overlapped the second petal I made. Same thing, I'm going to overlap this one. Oops. Again, not a perfect shape, but I got some little points in there to give it that rose petal kind of feel. Overlap again. Overlap again. Do you notice how my petals are starting to get slightly bigger? They're wider. Overlap again. And they don't have to have just one point, they can have a couple different points on there. Each one can be a little different. And I'm going to keep just starting on that original, the one that I just did, and overlapping it a little bit. This one is going to go behind that flower, so I'll pick up my pen and bring it down right here. And since I'm kind of starting on a new layer, I'm going a little bit wider on my petals. And you can certainly soften these up. They can be a little more flowy, like that. Let that one come down right there. Now we're getting pretty wide here. And you just keep moving around, ever increasing the size of the petals and going behind whatever you want to have overlap it. So I'm getting close to the end because those are pretty wide petals, which I don't really want to go too much bigger than that anyway. So I kind of like this size right here, and I'm going to stick with that. If I want to come in later, I can always come in and add a few more. Okay, so my next flower, we're just going to leave that as is for now, and we'll move on to our next flower. My next flower is going to be more of a cone flower shaped, okay? So it's going to also overlap a little bit behind here, and a little bit even behind the rose. And I want my center to be about here. So I'm just going to put a little dot right there. So I did a very large flower. This one is much, much smaller, and I'm going to try to go for a flower that's not as big as this one, kind of in between the two now, okay? So I'm going to, again, kind of outline kind of what I think my center should be, about how wide. This is maybe the size of a nickel. I would rather have it be too small when I map it out like this and make it bigger than to make it too big. So that's really always in art, when you're trying to figure out what size something is, go just a little bit small. Okay, these are all going to be very narrow petals, and I'm going to start with my petals that are going to shoot out that way where I can get the whole thing in. So I'm going to start from the center, get a nice curve, a little point, and they're going to touch almost in the middle. Not quite, but I mean pretty close. And I'm going to go right next to it. Come out from behind here I'm pretty close on touching it. Now this next one, think of them as hands of clocks. You're gonna keep moving around here. This one is gonna shoot out this way, and it's probably gonna need to overlap this a little bit. So my center, or my side, is gonna go here, overlap behind, and then it ends up going here. And so I'm just gonna start on this side, and now it'll look like it's going behind that flower. Keep moving my way around. And they can be pointy like this or a little bit stubby. It's up to you totally. And they can be a variety of both. That's okay. This one's going to end behind my rose. Keep moving my way around here. I need them to kind of start going this way. Again, when I make petals and I'm going around, I try to think of hands of a clock so that I don't end up with a crooked flower and crooked petals. And it's okay to have gaps in between. We'll fill those in when we're done. This one's getting a little bigger than I initially had planned, which is fine. Sometimes I get busy talking and then I don't realize how big I'm getting it to be. Okay, that's gonna go off the page. Okay, and now I have this, I have lots of gaps in between. We're just gonna leave those for now, and let's go ahead and fill in our center. So for our center, instead of little circles, we're gonna do little lines. And at first you probably won't be able to even see them hardly. Go around the whole thing with little hash marks. And then just start filling them in the middle. They're little tiny lines and they're going all different directions. You don't want to end up with it black, but you do want to have a lot of marks. And make sure you're getting a few little hash marks that are coming out onto your petals a little bit so it looks like it's overlapping it. Okay, now we kind of have a much better general idea of how the flower is going to look. Again, I kind of wish it would have been just a little bit smaller, but that's okay. I'm going to go with it. So in our gaps here, let's fill in some of those. Now that we know really what the shape of the flower is looking like, I can fill in my gaps. So I'm going to do another petal coming this way, going behind that one. You're not necessarily going to see either edge of that. They're tucked behind both of these and coming out. And you don't have to do it on every one, just where you're seeing large gaps. I think might leave those as is. I don't think I necessarily have to do anything with those. Okay. And then finally for our last flower, we're going to do a smaller one right here. Now I say small, but I've been going big today, so we'll see how it turns out. To start off with, and this again is going to be tucked behind these two. To start off with this one, let's just draw a little tiny wiggly little circle. Obviously not circular shape at all, more like the white of an egg when you're cooking it in a pan. And around that, I'm going to do another one, just a little bit bigger. Okay, and then I'm going to do little tiny little petals, very, very small, all the way around those. They almost look like little half circles. And around those, in between, if I can, I'm going to go with a little bit bigger so they can have a little more of a gap in between them. And this doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to make sure you go in between each or anything like that. We just want them bigger. So again, I have the two little egg things in the middle, little mini petals going around, a little bit bigger petals. And now we're going to go with some nice longer petals, not long like this, but long like that. Okay, so all the way around, and they can go ahead and touch, but don't feel like they have to be super close together. It's okay to have some gaps in between them. How are we doing? Good? Okay, let's go even more so. Let's go in between these with just a little bit longer ones. Probably shouldn't have started with that one, but in between each one of these with a little bit longer. That one's probably gonna not show where it comes down. Now, I could go even bigger. I think I'm gonna stop there. Tell you what I might do. I might do another one right here so that I'll end up with two of these right here. Because it feels like we need something there. We're gonna add leaves here in a minute. But let's just make another little one of these. So again, my two little egg things, mini petals going all the way around. Bigger petals. And nice big petals. Tucking it behind the petals of that other flower. When you have things overlap like that, it really makes a difference. It really makes things feel more, not necessarily realistic, because we're not going for total realistic looks, but it makes it feel like it makes more sense. And in between each one of those, we'll do a nice long one. So there would be one here, so it'd kind of come down that way. This one will barely show at all. Okay, that one will not show. That one would be there. Another one coming this way. And if I just remember I'm going in between each of these, it helps me keep track of where I'm at. It doesn't have to be perfectly in between, but that one I'm going to come around that way. Okay, I like that. Okay, I'm glad I went with two of those. I think that'll work great. So now we want to talk about leaves. So we just need some leaves for filler to kind of help us fill in the space. So I'm going to start with the biggest one, which is just going to be a simple shape that's going to kind of shoot this way, I think. So we'll have it come right in between this space here. So I'm going to have it start here. And then we'll have the center of it go right there. Okay, easy. And then we'll do our roses. And with the roses, we're gonna do two of them. So first, right here, about not totally at the top, but maybe 2/3 of the way up the side of the rose, just draw a line that kind of comes like that, curves around a little bit. And this one you might feel kind of like it's a little tricky, so feel free to just turn the paper if it's easier for you. I don't want to start at the line itself. That's going to be the center of our leaf. I want to come up from it and draw some little spikies. Because roses tend to have kind of spiky leaves. It needs to meet right there. And you can decide if you want your line to come down. And if you want, you can add little veins coming down the side. That's up to you. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Kind of depends on my mood, I guess. Okay, and now I want another one that's going to be halfway underneath that. So I'm going to come down here a little bit, and remember I'm going to draw my center line first, so I don't want to get too close to that one. And I'm going to let this one kind of curve the other way. And I'll come behind here and draw my first spiky. I like that technical term, spikies. And from here, come out this way. And I can draw my little lines that make the veins. Of course, allowing it to go behind this flower here, which is going to be in the front. Okay. And then I think for this one, we need something coming out here, but I think I want to do something a little viney. So when I make a flower arrangement like this, I can do it lots of different ways, but I usually try to do something big, something middle, although that one got a little big, something a little bit smaller than the middle one, and then maybe some tiny ones. So these are my tiny ones. And for leaves, I try to do a big leaf, something with some character, so like my little spiky one here. And then I like to do something that's viney. So this would have, it'd probably have a leaf that's closer to this, but I'm not trying to necessarily get the leaf that goes with this flower. I'm just going with some kind of a design. So I'm gonna make a nice flowy line coming out, going behind here. I'll just follow my line as if I'm drawing, coming out this way and curving up. And from that, I'm going to place some leaves. So I'll start with this one. Just some nice small, I have a big leaf, I have a middle-sized leaf, let's do a small leaf. And then I'll maybe have this curve up. And I can follow that vein all the way up or close to all the way up. And the key for this kind of leaf is to have lots of variation in where the leaves go. So I don't really want any leaf to line perfectly up with another, so I wouldn't have made one right there. I like the variety. And then on this one, I'm gonna make a leaf coming, it was almost as if it started here and it shot out right here. So that way it feels like it connects that also. And don't be afraid to have it go off the paper, that's not a problem. There'll be some leaves behind here, but we're gonna ignore them for now. Well, let's get some leaves here. So I want a leaf that's gonna shoot out this way from behind this flower. And one that's gonna be tucked way up here. And it's gonna start that way, okay? And then it gets a little tight in here. We're gonna have to draw one that's gonna come off the paper. And maybe one that goes this way. We won't even worry about that upper area. And then right under here, we'll just have one that kind of comes down just to fill the space. So now we have a really nice design. We could put our bigger one down there. I kind of like that big one up there though, it's kind of fun. And so now the next step we're gonna do, we could leave it like this and look great. We could color it with crayons, we could color it with colored pencil, we could do all kinds of things. But I wanna teach you a little bit of a watercolor technique that I think that you're gonna have fun with. So we'll give that a try. Okay, so you guys, what my plan is I'm gonna show you the technique that I'm gonna use using just this bigger flower up here. And then I might speed it up and do the whole thing for you so you can kind of see how it goes. Because I think once you learn the technique, you can make it a zillion different ways that can be really fun. So I'm gonna take my paintbrush and I'm just going to use water. I know you can't see the water going on, but bear with me. And when I am putting the water on the permanent marker, this is why we chose to use the permanent marker. It might have a little bit of a gray feel to it because it's wet, but the permanent marker, if it's dry, will stay where it is. So the watercolor that we're using, in order to have it kind of make this soft, kind of real, almost like a romantic feel, the way that we're going to do that is by first adding water to the petals and then just setting the water on there, or the watercolor on there, and letting it kind of drip on at its own little, making its own little design. So I really want to make sure that my water that I'm putting on here now, that I'm getting the full shape of the petals that I'm painting on. And the water is going on pretty thick. If I were to tilt this, it would drip off, so don't tilt it, you need to do it flat. I don't want to go outside those petals though, because if I do, like for instance here, if I went beyond this line, it would bleed into my rose. I don't really want that to happen. If you make a mistake and it does end up doing that, go ahead and just use a paper towel, soak it up, or let it all dry and start all over. Let me quick get this water on here. You do want to move kind of quickly if you're going to do them all at the same time, which I would probably suggest, just because you don't want that first petal to end up drying. So notice I'm not going in the center. I'm trying to avoid that center as much as I can. Okay, one more petal. Now you can use whatever colors you want. I will tell you that in this technique, we're not trying to blend the colors. Like I said before, we're mostly letting the colors bleed into each other and they kind of decide how they want to go. If you are adding too many colors, you may end up getting a mucky brown, which is not really something we probably want for flowers. So I will warn you about that. And the more paint you put on there, the brighter it's going to be. So I'm going to choose just, I'm going to choose a simple like hot pink here, or magenta. And I'm just going to touch my paper, let it kind of bleed into there. So notice I'm not painting at all. Just wherever I laid that water, I'm letting that touch it and let it kind of do its own thing. And notice I'm doing this darker color towards the center without going into the center. Again, make it kind of push it in there as close as I can. In watercolor, a lot of times you tell the paint where you want it to go, and sometimes it even cooperates. So if I get a little pool, you can see it's kind of pooling right here, and I don't really want that. I'm just going to grab a little tiny piece of paper towel. Doesn't take much, just set it there, let it soak up a little bit. And it's caused from just having a little too much water there. I do want the color there though. I don't want it to take away the color, so without adding any more water, I'm going to come in, because there's still some water on there, and just touch it around a little bit. Okay, I really love that. I love how it's bleeding out. I love how it's uneven right there. That's awesome. Okay, so I'm going to clean my brush off, and I'm going to choose a different color, and maybe on this one I might just choose a lighter pink. We'll see how that goes. And right up here where that ends, I'm going to touch in a little bit of that lighter pink. And again, just kind of, I'm pushing it a little bit in there and maybe pulling a little bit of that darker magenta out, but I really kind of want to let it do its own thing. I don't really want to start bossing it around too much. So adding a little bit of water to my paintbrush. Might have added a little too much, we'll see. I don't use a ton of watercolor. There are some people who are just amazing watercolorists. I am not one because it's not really the medium that I use most often, but I do love playing with it sometimes. And for this particular thing that we're doing here, this kind of dried up a little bit, so I'm just going to add a little extra water. For this particular kind of colorization of these flowers, the black ink is really the star of the show in here, you know, painting it with that, or drawing it on there with the bold black ink. So the color is not meant to be realistic, it's not meant to be bold, it's meant to just kind of give us a little hint of color to make it pleasing to the eye. So for what we're doing, you can just play all day long doing that, and just fun things will turn out. Okay, I'm gonna get the brush washed off, and now I'm gonna choose like a very light color. I might choose a yellow. I probably wouldn't have wanted to use a yellow with this dark magenta. It might have turned to a brown, but because this light pink is so light, I might be able to use it with that. We'll see. Now it's going on pretty bold, so I think what I'm gonna do is just get my paintbrush a little wet, clean it off, and add some more drops of water. If I add the drops of water and push the paint around a little bit, it should mellow it out. If it doesn't, I will show you what I can do here. So like I said, I'm gonna just do this first flower, then I'm gonna let you guys see the whole process kind of sped up, and then I'll turn you loose to do your own thing. Okay, so it's still a little more bold than I would like, so I'm just gonna come in here with my paper towel, touch it around a little bit, especially right here because it's pooling a little. I just want a hint of yellow. I don't want it to be too bold. And then I can take my brush with just water on it, and if I want, I can I don't want to touch my paper too much. With watercolor, the goal is to kind of just let the paper and paint do their own thing. But sometimes you can push it around a little bit and tell it where to go. Most of this flower is off the page here, so I don't need a whole lot of yellow on that. And I like where the yellow is meeting up with the pink. I'm getting a little bit of an orange feel, and as long as I don't over mix that, it should stay there and work really well together. So I think what I'll do is I'm going to come back in with that light pink. Kind of like that orangey feel that I saw form in there. And let that play into there a little bit, because I don't really want the yellow to take over and become the star of the show. And then for the center, what I think I'm going to do is a dark purple, because it'll go really well with the magenta. Almost ready for that. And I really don't want these little spots here, so if I get those, I'm just going to kind of wipe my brush off and kind of pull it a little bit to eliminate the spots. I'm remembering that if at any time I feel like I need to, I can always grab my paper towel and pull it off. So there's a lot of pooling right here. I want to just leave this. I don't want to touch that. I want that to dry itself. Sometimes if it gets to a certain point, I can run a blow dryer over it, but watercolor, you might just have to do one area and let it just completely dry before you touch the other parts. As long as I don't try to come in here where the flowers are next to each other and touching. If I start down here, I could do this down here while that's drying and then work my way across. So, but don't be afraid to let it rest also. Okay, one more thing in the middle before I start to just color on time lapse. So again, I don't really need to, I'm not going to try to individually, oops, guess what I didn't do? And I don't want to, I guess, color this in with water or paint it in with water. I just want to drop a little here and there. But notice I'm not trying to paint those individual marks. Okay, I washed off the paint that I had on my brush. I'm just getting a little bit of water, not super drippy. I'm just going to drag this around, and if it begins to bleed into the magenta, that's okay. It's going to look really cool if it does, actually. But by dropping it in here a little at a time, I can kind of get a variation of color too, where some of them are dark purple and some of them are not so dark. Okay, you can see some spots where it's starting to bleed into that magenta, and I really love that. I think that's really pretty. Might even kind of break the barrier there and push it in there, but this is so pretty. I love that. Don't love this because it's kind of a pool, so I might just, if it's gonna bleed, I can either push it this way or pull it that way. Grab a little magenta and make sure it stays magenta. Okay, so I'm gonna let that dry. I got a little wide there. Might grab my paper towel and soak up a little of that so it doesn't get into the yellow. If that purple gets into the yellow, it's gonna start to make mud. We don't want that. So I'm gonna let that sit and dry, and I'm gonna speed up the camera and let you see the rest of the process. And then I encourage you to just try this, experiment with it, and have fun with it. And there you have it. So I will let this all dry. There's some wrinkles in it now just because the the paper tends to bubble up a little bit, but I can let it dry. If I really am not happy with the bubbling and it's still there, I can always like just dry or iron it with an iron. I got a little bleed here, which I almost kind of wish I would have done that over the whole thing, but since I didn't, I'm just gonna get it up a little bit here. So don't be afraid of bleeding in and amongst each other. You will notice that like when I started, I had done this and then I started this one, I tried to be very careful not to let that water and the paint touch where the two meet up, because it will cause a bleed. One will bleed into another. Your other option is to let it just dry all together before you move from one step to another, but I don't really have patience for that, so I just try to be careful. Sometimes it bleeds like the green did into, actually that is a yellow that bled into the blue, and I really love that. I think that looks great. So don't be afraid of the bleeds. It's part of the process of watercolor. It can be fun. And then the other option you have for this is I could have just put a whole bunch of watercolor over the entire thing, not worried about any color combinations, just not mixing it very much, letting it bleed like I did here, let it completely dry, and then I could have just done my drawing right over that and just had a general all over color, and that would have looked fabulous also. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. It's a lot of fun. It's a little bit of a doodle, a little bit of a watercolor. You can just do the doodle and it'll look fantastic, or you can do the watercolor too, and it's a lot of fun. So again, send me pictures, let me see it, you guys. Hope y'all have a great day. Thanks.